Hey y'all, so for today's video, I'm going to be answering some of the most commonly asked questions about my eating disorder recovery from binge eating disorder and morbid obesity. I'm also going to be doing this video in two parts, so if you're interested in hearing the rest of what I have to say, please make sure to check in next week in order to see the rest of the video. So first off the bat, I am not a doctor, I'm not a licensed medical professional or psychologist. I am just sharing my own experiences as someone recovering from compulsive overeating and binge eating disorder. So that's off the bat. I'm also going to include in the description box some links to some resources that I have found helpful that I think you might also enjoy taking a look at. So, first question, what is binge eating disorder? Based on the National Eating Disorder Awareness's website, binge eating disorder is a severe, life-threatening, and treatable eating disorder characterized by recurrent episodes of eating large quantities of food, often very quickly and to the point of discomfort, a feeling of a loss of control during the binge, experiencing shame, distress, or guilt afterwards, and not regularly using unhealthy compensatory measures, e.g. purging, to counter the binge eating. It is the most common eating disorder in the United States. So my experience with binge eating disorder is that I would compulsively eat. I would grab food from the kitchen and I would hide it in my bedroom. I would be obsessing about what I was going to eat, how much I was going to eat of something. In high school, I went through a period of chewing and spitting food out, and I went through a period where I was an exercise bulimic, which is where I would binge, and then I would go and exercise for 3 or 4 hours a day. That's something that a lot of men, I think, do, but don't really talk about. But for the most part, I would go through long stretches where all I was doing was binge eating. And that was for me a huge reason for why I gained so much weight so quickly. Where can I get help for my eating disorder? So there are a lot of different ways that people go about finding recovery. Obviously, therapy is a great start. Some people go in treatment, which means they go and they stay at a place to start their recovery. Some people do outpatient, where they stay at home, but they go into a hospital numerous times a week, and they do group and different things like that. There are also, just like there's Alcoholics Anonymous for alcoholics, there are 12-step programs for people who struggle with food addiction and compulsive eating. One of the most popular ones that people know about is Overeaters Anonymous. So that's another place for you to go and look at resources there. But most importantly, be willing to do the research and find what works for you. As far as getting help for an eating disorder, I think the one thing that is most helpful for me is you can't fix a broken mind with a broken brain. So the whole idea that I was going to fix all this by myself did not work, because every day I would wake up and I would say, tomorrow's another day, today I'll do it, and then I'll mess up halfway through the day and then I'll be, tomorrow I'll do it. So wherever my brain was thinking, I could not control it. So I needed to be willing to get outside help. And that meant therapy and other support, and needing people who were also in recovery from binge eating disorder to share with me their experiences, because I trusted them because they had the same experiences that I had. And I think it's also important to note that there's a lot of books we can read. And one thing I learned early on is I can read so many books and I can have all the information, but it doesn't mean that I have the mental wellness to be able to implement those things that I'm learning. And that is why I needed a lot of outside support as I was working on my recovery. Somebody had asked me, why am I always hungry? For me, as a compulsive overeater, I used food to cope with all my feelings. Food for me was like a pacifier. And here's the thing, throughout our day, we're going to have a lot of feelings. There are going to things that are going to bring up anxiety and fear and doubt and anger. And for me, I was a people pleaser, and I would use food to stuff down those feelings. So part of it is when we ask ourselves, like, well, why am I hungry? Well, my answer is, well, I'm a compulsive overeater. That's just what I do. And so when I could accept that, I could realize I didn't have to always sit there and listen, I wasn't always hungry. Sometimes I just wanted to put something in my mouth because I didn't want to feel what I was feeling. So I think for me, again, it's a question for you to kind of ask for yourself, why am I hungry? Or why am I eating when I'm not hungry? Or am I eating just to not feel something? It's amazing how easy it is to use food to cope with things. I knew what foods to eat to help me stay up at night to study. I knew what foods to eat to put me to sleep at night. I knew how to use food. There's also this idea within like addiction recovery where, there's this whole idea of like our instincts have gone awry. And so we have these instincts for survival, but as a compulsive overeater, I wasn't eating for survival. I was eating to escape. And on top of that, I was eating in such a way that it was showing up on my body. And I I wouldn't have been able to survive at that body weight. It wasn't sustainable and it wasn't going to keep me healthy. Um, I was morbidly obese. Okay, another question I got asked was like, I can't stop binging. Why can't I stop binging? And I kind of just addressed this in that last question. But here's the thing, there is science behind why people compulsively eat. There is a lot of science behind all that stuff. And so I'm answering this question again because I think the important thing to realize is I can understand the science, but it doesn't mean it's going to stop me from compulsive overeating. It can give me awareness, but I also have to be willing to accept the fact that it's a problem before I can really take any action to do anything different around it. So all that information is, for me, has been great for providing awareness, but not necessarily for me to be able to implement change on my own. Another thing that I had to realize, as I just said, which was that I have to look at my eating disorder as an addiction. And if you look at an alcoholic or drug addict and you look at, your own family, we all find ways to cope with dysfunction that we have going on in our lives. And I never picked up alcohol, I never picked up drugs, but I picked up food from a really young age to deal with the craziness in my household. And as I got older, a huge part of that is realizing is how was my eating disorder affecting the people around me? There were people who were enabling my behavior because they just wanted me to be happy, or there were people who would enable my behavior because I knew that if I couldn't get what I wanted, I would get irritated and upset and annoyed. So again, that whole idea about, why am I binge eating? For me, I had to realize this was the way that I was addicted. The next question is, how did I stop binge eating? The most important part with this is realizing is I'm an addict, and they say in recovery that a lot of addicts have to hit bottom before they're willing to get help. Because when you hit bottom, you're willing to get honest. So for me, when I realized that I could not stop eating and I was ruining my life, I was unhappy, I didn't feel comfortable in my body, but I was still binging anyways, even though I knew that if I kept eating this way, my body was going to get larger, I kept eating that way. So I was going against my own instincts and my own needs and desires. But the thing about honesty is when I can sit down with another person and I can be honest about what I am doing with food, it creates space. It creates a space of, whether it's God or a higher power coming into your life, or whether that space just lifts the shame a little bit because you're not keeping these secrets anymore. And so for me, I had to get really honest about what I was doing with the food, how I was eating it, when I was eating it, and be willing to address it. And the next question is, how did I lose weight? A lot of people ask me on a regular basis how I lost the weight. And it's really hard for me to articulate it because when I got into recovery, a part of me got into recovery because there's this saying in recovery, I came for the vanity and stayed for the sanity. Because I wanted to lose weight. I really wanted to lose weight. But I also knew that I couldn't stop eating. And it's amazing for me how when I got into recovery and I stopped compulsively overeating, how the weight did come off. When you get into recovery, when you are willing to be honest about what you do with the food, it makes it easier to be honest about the steps that you need to take. Different people do it differently. I am only sharing my experience, not anyone else's. I had to identify the foods that I knew that I ate compulsively, that once I started, I could not stop. Some people in their recovery, they can eat in moderation. When I was new in recovery, I needed to abstain from those foods. For me, I saw that the common ingredients in all the foods that I was eating compulsively were sugar and flour. For whatever reasons, things with flour and sugar like fried foods or sweet foods like cakes and desserts and cookies, they created that phenomenon of craving that I could not stop. And so with the help of a lot of people, I made the decision to abstain from those foods. And for myself, I just ate 3 meals a day and nothing in between. And again, this is just what I do. There's a lot of people that do 3 meals a day and 2 or 3 snacks, and you get to figure this out with a physician or with your mental health provider who's going to work you through, whatever eating disorder recovery you need. It's different for different people. And so for me, when I started eating 3 meals a day and I stopped eating those foods that I was eating compulsively, the weight came off pretty quickly. And for a while, I allowed myself to have a pretty structured food plan. I think it's really different. Also, it's important to recognize, that I don't call it a diet. I don't diet. I have a plan of eating, because the whole idea of diet is something that I tried to do my whole life. I tried to eat this way or eat that way. But when I look at my food as a plan of eating, it's not restrictive anymore. And I really started to look at what are all the foods that I can eat, even though I'm not eating these other foods. And I'm able to go to restaurants and enjoy my meal. And that's a huge part of my experience with my recovery. Also, because I don't come from the background of severe restricting. So for me as a binge eater, I needed support in having healthy boundaries around food. So one thing I also did was I had a mentor that I would commit my food to. So that means that I would call in what I was going to eat for the day, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or I would commit my lunch, my dinner, my breakfast for the next day. And if I needed to make a change to that meal, then I would call it in before I ate it. Because the whole idea was just to be conscious about what I was doing with the food. It wasn't about being rigid. It wasn't about controlling. For me, the act of committing my food was a sense of surrendering and an admission that, okay, I'm a compulsive eater and I got to be conscious while I'm eating. In recovery, there's a lot of people who feel like they call themselves recovered because they don't still want to identify with the idea of being a compulsive eater or a recovering addict. They'd like to say, I'm recovered. For myself, spiritually and personally, that doesn't work for me because I have to eat every day. And every day I have to be conscious of what I'm doing with the food because we're dealing with emotions and feelings, and on any given day, I could be more susceptible to wanting to use the food to cope. For 14 years, I have not done that by the grace of God, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But I'm okay with saying that I'm a recovering compulsive overeater, a recovering binge eater, and that's going to be part of my life story. So guys, I'm going to end the questions there because next week I'm going to be answering more questions that you guys have been asking me. So please make sure to check in next week if you are interested in hearing more information about this. And in the comments below, please let me know if there's any more questions that you'd like me to answer. I'd be happy to answer them for you.